Today what we're going to take a look at is an event that is going to change American history. It's an event that is a turning point in American history, and it's an event, I'm going to give you a clue, that is going to start 90 miles away from Tinkerbell, 90 miles away from Mickey Mouse, from Peter Pan, from Aladdin, from The Little Mermaid, Cinderella, Disney World.
Cuba.
It is a place
Cuba, yeah.
right here, 90 miles away, Cuba.
Soy un cubano, todos me bailan contento, se divierten como hermano, soy guajiro, monte adentro, si en el campo yo nací.
And 90 miles away from the United States, in an island nation called Cuba, there is a place that for over 400 years was colonized. Remember the word from the previous activity. 400 years, over 400 years, Cuba was a colony of Spain's. Now I'm going to point something out because this is going to be important as well. Not only was Cuba a colony of Spain's, but a place called the Philippines over in Asia is also going to be a colony of Spain's. They're going to kind of come in at the end of this event and play an important role as well. And especially for Friday, the Philippines is going to be super important.
How long was the Philippines colony? Also
For around the, I don't know the exact date, I think it was like in the early 1500s, but I could be wrong. But for hundreds of years at the minimum. This all starts, for those of you when you were little and you remember, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? Nina Pinta and all that crap. Important, but, Columbus wasn't the hero that, some people make him out to be. I mean, he was and he wasn't. He had his many flaws, like genocide against a whole entire group of people. But in 1492, he plants the flag on Cuban soil, thus making Cuba a Spanish colony. Now, for those of you that are wondering, okay, well, what does this have to do with Los Estados Unidos, the United States? Cuba, here's a Spanish map from the 1700s. You could see, this is what the world looked like back then according to the Europeans who were conquering it. The pink areas, including Mexico and parts of South America, they're controlled by Spain. The areas that are this gold-yellow color, English colonies. And, of course, this turquoise color is French territory. So you have these different colonies. Now, here's the problem for Cuba. If you look at this map, we all got our independence, 4th of July, fireworks, eating hot dogs and stuff. We're free. And Mexico got its independence in 1821. Peru got its independence in 1824 from Spain. Brazil got its independence from Portugal in 1822. Haiti got its independence from France in 1804, and a lot of these countries are gaining their independence except Cuba. Cuba was one of the few countries that had yet to break free of its colonial past. And part of it is because Spain is resisting giving these places their independence. They didn't grant Mexico its independence. England didn't grant us our independence. We had to fight for it. And so Cuba was colonized still. Now, once again, what does this have to do with American history? Why are we talking about this? Did I walk into the wrong room? And now, am I in Spain's history or Cuba's history? Here's why it matters. Cuba, starting in the 1860s, starts rebelling again. In fact, since 1868, there's been rebellion after rebellion after rebellion. And a student actually drew this, kind of showing Cuba being chained to Spain, this idea of colonialism. Now it's an awesome drawing, I think, really represents the idea of colonies and colonialism. Can anybody notice what they messed up on, though? Story of my life. Anybody at all?
Of Spain?
Well, yeah.
That's not.
I'm not nitpicking that much, but yeah, maybe it's not perfect. But there's something else, something big, something like, dude, you're gonna spend all that time making this awesome.
Oh, they spelled independent.
Yeah. The kid came to me and I was like, dude, awesome. And you know the irony of it all? It was the year that song was out.
What's
Independent. Do you know what that mean, man? And you know they spell it twice. That song was playing on the radio nearly every day while this student drew this drawing.
I don't know.
And I just shook my head. Cried. But it was still a pretty cool drawing, so I'll keep it in there. So Spain was revolting, or Cuba was revolting against Spain, and it kept happening, and they kept getting crushed. In 1895, they find a leader. You know, we had George Washington. India, later on, will have Gandhi. Who is the leader of Mexican independence?
No, hold on.
Hidalgo, right?
The priest.
I don't know.
The breeze. You know, Hawaii had Queen Liliuokalani. The Cuban people had a guy who...
Che Guevara.
Cuba Libre. No, Che's not alive yet. Before Che, before Fidel, before these famous Cubans, there was... Jose Marti. He becomes kind of the leader of the independence movement. He's actually in New York, the United States, when he starts gaining support for the movement. Jose Marti, awesome mustache, becomes the leader for Cuban independence. Now, if any of you ever end up in Echo Park, by the lake, right across the street from that big giant church, there's a statue, and here it is, that commemorates Jose Marti. Random fun fact, if you ever want to take someone on a date, you can do a little picnic right by it, and then you can look up at the statue of Jose Marti and say, Mi amor, Jose Marti was a Cuban revolutionary. He was a poet. He wanted Cuba to be free, and I want our love to be free, baby girl. Or baby boy. Whatever you're into, I don't judge. And you can launch into a whole story. You can even make things up because they probably don't know anything about it, about Jose Marti. And the reason why he's there, actually, is because way back in the day, before the hipsters came into Echo Park, there was a Cuban community that was pretty large way back in the 60s, actually. So, Cuban community in Echo Park put that statue in to celebrate one of the Cuban heroes of their history. Now, you're probably still wondering, what the hell are we doing talking about Cuba and Spain? We need America to get involved. And anybody know what's going on in this image? If you do, touch some sky and tell me what you see. What's going on here?
Cotton.
What's going on here?
Harvesting corn.
You're not touching sky. I need touching some sky. Yes.
Harvesting corn.
Not corn. Good guess.
Slaves picking cotton.
Not cotton.
Is it wheat?
Not wheat. You don't know your crops.
Sugar?
It is sugar.
Sugar
Sugar cane. For those of you that put that stuff all over your coffee or cereal, sugar cane is the crop. Doesn't look like sugar. I don't know if you guys imagine like a tree with little packets on it or something.
Yeah.
It has to come from somewhere. It snows. That's sugar. Sugar cane was a very important crop in Cuba, and the United States did not take over Cuba, but was investing lots of money in the sugar plantation economy. American businesses, keep in mind, American businesses, not American government. The American businesses were investing. They had like $50 million in investments in Cuba. What did that mean? That means they were buying up land where they could grow sugar so they could make dinero, money. So that's where we kind of have an interest, a motive here. But if you remember from way back in 8th grade, you may have been taught, and maybe most likely not, that in the 1850s, America actually tried to buy Cuba from Spain. The U.S. government tried to buy it, and there were a lot of Southern Americans, people from the southern states, that thought Cuba would be a great state to add to the Union. And they thought it would be a great slave state to add to the Union. Now go back to our Cuba Revolution period. No one was trying to buy Cuba anymore. They decided slavery was over in America, also in Cuba. So the new interest is no longer buying it because Spain said no. Spain actually said, I'd rather sink Cuba or see it below the ocean than see it in the hands of the United States. So Cuba said, hell no. And they actually said it in Spanish and English. They said no, and then they said no. Just, bilingual here. So this happens. Some of you were like really thinking like, wait. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Julie.
Yeah, Julie. Julie.
Judy.
No one knows. I know, I do that on purpose. Now here's what happens. So the U.S. is investing money. Long time ago they tried to buy it. No longer an interest. Spain controls Cuba. Independence is still misspelled.
This right here is my swag. All the girls are on me. Damn. Everybody pay attention. This right here is my pretty boy swag.
William McKinley. Hey, William McKinley is the president of the United States. I don't know, I just needed a song to hype up William McKinley because he's not one of these guys that just says, get excited. William McKinley is the president of the United States. He's president number 25, so if you're ever on Jeopardy, who was the 25th president? William McKinley. He's the president from 1897 to 1901. He will get shot and killed, and Theodore Roosevelt will take over. So he's the president. The year is now 1898. Hashtag POTUS. If you ever see that, I didn't know what that was. I had to Google it because I was seeing it on social media. Does anyone know what POTUS stands for? Come on. President of the United States. So if you're ever on Twitter and you want to talk about the president, you go POTUS. I don't know. You young people, you guys have all these hashtags.
I saw it in a mention after Obama tweeted about Derrick Rose.
Oh, Obama's tweeting on Derrick Rose, like the comeback?
Yeah, he said, welcome back, D. Rose, Bulls Nation.
There you go. Oh, yeah, he's a Chicago guy. So, it worked last night, though. Anyways. Damn it. William McKinley. He's the president. So here's what happens. McKinley's hearing about the situation in Cuba. It's 1898. There's been revolution going on. Jose Marti's trying to get independence. Spain's crushing it. Spain is wanting to maintain control of Cuba. McKinley is worried about two things. One, there are Americans living in Cuba. And when there's a revolution, there's a potential that their lives can be in danger. The other thing he's worried about is the fact that American companies have invested nearly $50 million, and when there's a revolution, what if those properties are threatened by violence? So what he decides to do is he tells Spain, I'm going to send a ship to Cuba to monitor the situation. We're going to keep an eye on things, and if American lives are in danger, we're going to help them out. And if an American business interests are threatened, we're going to intervene. So he sends the ship called the USS Maine.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic point aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailor, fast the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour.
And the USS Maine shows up, and it actually docks in the harbor of Havana. So it anchors right here. Havana, Cuba, city in Cuba. There's a harbor, just like, where ships hang out. And the ship is there, and it's hanging out right there in Havana. It's not that big. Some of you think it's as big as Cuba. You're getting nervous. It's, not scaled to size. And it's hanging out there for about 3 weeks just watching the situation, nothing crazy going on, 3 weeks, sitting in the harbor, bunch of dudes are on it, naval people, and while it's sitting there for 3 weeks, after 3 weeks, nothing's happening, in February, I believe it's February 15th, 1898, it blows up. Suddenly, USS Maine explodes. That ship blew up in February of 1898. Very quickly, American people began to say, remember the Maine, because it's a national tragedy when this happens.
How many?
Good question. How many people are aboard this very large ship? Before I tell you that, here it is in color. I blew it up 3 times for you. This is an artist's depiction of the event. There was no photography of the actual explosion. And before I tell you anything else, a moment. Silence for the men aboard the USS Maine. Each one of these are the names of the individuals who were aboard the USS Maine and who lost their lives on that day. Next to their names is their rank and job in the USS Navy. On the exam, you will be asked to tell me the names of all of them, so hopefully you're writing very quickly. Oh yeah. Of a ship of 374 people, 374 people were aboard the USS Maine on the day that it exploded. Of 374 people, there were 260 who died aboard that ship on that day. 260 lives lost. In fact, the final death toll was 266 because 6 more people died as a result of their injuries in the days and weeks that followed. The image you see right here is of the funeral of many of those who did pass away. And as I said, out of a crew of 374, 260 Americans who were killed. That's about 70% of the ship. It's a huge loss. Yes, sir?
Why were some of the names highlighted blue?
Some of the names were highlighted because I was not about to type the list, so I copied and pasted it from the memorial webpage, and if you click those, you would read more about their story, so it's a hyperlink. Some of them had asterisks next to them, and that's because they did not die immediately. They are those individuals who died as a result of injuries. So the dead were buried, and of course, when a tragedy like this happens, these are young men, anywhere between 18 all the way up. Many of them, obviously, with families and wives and moms, dads, grandpas, grandmas, cousins, dogs, goldfish, things like that. I want to read for you, actually, one eyewitness account. This is a Navy diver. He went underwater, and he was exploring the wreckage and trying to recover evidence and also bodies. And here's what he said he saw. He said, "It was horrible. As I descended into the death ship, the Maine's wreckage, the dead rose up to meet me. They floated toward me with outstretched arms as if to welcome their shipmate. because they're floating in the water. Their faces, for the most part, were bloated with decay or burned beyond recognition, but here and there the light of my lamp flashed upon a stony face I knew. Keep in mind, underwater it gets very dark. Which, when I last saw it, had smiled a merry greeting, but now returned my gaze with staring eyes and fallen jaw. The dead choked the hatchways and blocked my passage from stateroom to cabin. I had to elbow my way through them as you do in a crowd. So he's literally swimming and it's dark and there's bodies everywhere. While I examined twisted iron and broken timbers, they brushed against my helmet and touched my shoulders with rigid hands, as if they sought to tell me the tale of the disaster. I often had to push them aside to make my examinations of the interior of the wreck. I felt like a live man in command of the dead. From every part of the ship came sighs and groans. I knew it was the gurgling of the water through the shattered beams and battered sides of the vessel, but it made me shudder. It sounded so much like echoes of that awful February night of death. The water swayed the bodies to and from and kept them constantly moving with a hideous semblance of life. Turn which way I would, I was confronted by a corpse. So, this event, obviously a national tragedy. There is a memorial to those individuals who died on that day in February of 1898. This is the mast of the ship. They recovered it and restored it. And on this memorial, it circles all the way around. It's quite large, as you can see. Your handsome teacher right there are the names of those individuals who died. Here is the image of the wreckage once they started to salvage it and bring it back up from the harbor. So, yes, sir.
How did the ship explode?
How does the ship explode? Guess which question you're going to be thinking about today. So, you'll see. Here are the names, just to give you an idea of the memorial. It's in Arlington National Cemetery. You got the names of those who died. Arlington National Cemetery is not just for people who died on this day, but in any of the many wars or tragedies of American military history. But one of the things that's interesting when you're walking around the cemetery is the number of unmarked graves for unknown USS Maine. Because obviously we don't have the technology in 1898, such as DNA testing. So some of these people you could not determine. So here's the question that I want you to think about. Yes.
Arlington, Texas.
Arlington National Cemetery is in Virginia, right next to Washington, D.C. There's a Arlington there, but this is the National Cemetery. That's where JFK is buried, John F. Kennedy. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about who did this and why. Who had a motive? What groups, countries, organizations? Before we discuss it, I just want you to kind of toss it around in your head